All right. It's not like I enjoy calling somebody a rat, okay? And everybody's, has had a lot to say, and it's certainly got a lot of publicity. Ron Darling's new book, 108 Stitches. But rather than just skim, which, I kind of saw excerpts and the first week, I spent the past weekend really reading it and going over it. And I got to tell you, from a guy, anybody who's known me for the 30 years I've been in this town covering sports, I made my bones in this town, in New York, being in locker rooms, speaking to athletes, being in clubhouses, on the field. And proud to say, I had and still have a lot of relationships. And call it a rule, call it an unwritten rule. For lack of a better term, you don't talk shit about what goes on in certain instances. You talk about the game. I mean, if I see somebody or had seen somebody over the years fooling around, doing something he shouldn't be doing, that's his business. Drinking, carousing, extramarital affairs, that's his business. Stuff that this guy, Ron Darling, some of the things that he did, I quite frankly, I think is disgraceful. Very, very disappointed. Very, very disappointed. And I'll tell you something right now. If a guy like myself, a reporter, sportscaster, or a beat writer, or somebody wrote about some of the things that Ron Darling and his cronies did, trust me, that me or anybody else would be persona non grata in said clubhouse. Okay? You can bet your sweet ass on that. But let me first talk about the Lenny Dykstra thing, because that was, quote unquote, the sexiest part. When I say the sexiest part, because that was the attention grabber. You've heard me say this about any and everything, and not sports related topics. You get into black and white, be it Jussie Smollett or anything else, you get into black and white, you're going to get heads turning and people are going to pay attention. And this business of all of a sudden, Ron Darling coming out talking about prior to a game 3 in the 86 World Series, that Lenny Dykstra is using vile, unimaginable language in the words, the description from Ron Darling towards starting pitcher Dennis Oil Can Boyd, talking about how he was sure worse than anything Jackie Robinson said or heard being said. Now, do me a favor, Ron Darling, okay? You're going to talk about, were you there with Jackie Robinson? Because something tells me nobody heard worse than what Jackie Robinson heard. Okay? You had a Philadelphia manager by the name of Ben Chapman sitting on the dugout steps eating a watermelon. So let's stop with the bullshit dramatics. I really, really don't understand that. And you have no verification that it was said. And folks, do not misread what I am saying to you now, okay? But what was being said 33 years ago, and what was, even if it was said, okay? What was said 33 years ago, what was tolerated 33 years ago, would not be tolerated today. Such as, use of the N-word or whatever. It really. To go ahead and bring this up to label somebody a racist. And we know Lenny Dykstra is no choir boy, okay? That goes without saying. Lenny Dykstra is going to be the first one to tell you that. And I'm not a Lenny Dykstra apologist, nor am I a fan. Lenny Dykstra is a flat-out character. We all know about his screw-ups. Bankruptcy fraud. Boy, was it grand theft auto charges, drug... I mean, he's had his issues. We know that. That doesn't make him a racist. Then in the book, again, this is Ron Darling, and in fact, I'm going to read. He was a criminal in every sense, although during his playing days, his crimes were mostly of an interpersonal nature. Again, I'm reading from page 38 in 108 Stitches by Ron Darling. He treated people like shit, walked around like a shit didn't stink, and was generally a shitty human being. And just maybe the most confident, cockiest player I would ever encounter. Well, first of all, let's go back to he treated people like shit, he walked around like a shit didn't stink. I got news for you. Go ask anybody covering, and I wasn't there in 86, okay? I was there in 88. Go ask anybody covering that group. Which of those ball players on that team did walk around like their shit didn't stink? That was part of that whole cocky group, of which you, my friend, Ron Darling, were part of. Talking about shit not stinking. I'm using his terminology. Okay? But to go ahead on call him racist and, talk about what he said was racist and hurtful stuff. And then he uses the term, it's only in retrospect that I started to feel somewhat complicit. And that by accepting the gifts that fell Lenny's way as a result of his ugly treatment of the opposing pitcher, I was an accomplice of a kind. You stop with this holier-than-thou, politically correct horseshit. Really. I just think, I think it's, Ron Darling's been given a lot of credit for being a Yale graduate. God bless him. Smart man. Maybe Ron thinks his shit doesn't stink. That he's smarter than everybody for coming out with this. But to me, it's not very bright at all. I mean, I do not know what the purpose of this book was other than to... What is it? Just nonsense. Just to hurt people. And dead people, too. And dead people, too, which I am going to get into that as well. But I like to know. I like to know. And what I said, I damn well mean. If I, Russ Salzberg, or any other sportscaster, sportswoman, sportsman, writer, beat writer, whatever... I mean, you cover a team, or you cover the players, unless it's pertinent. And we're not talking to, like, God forbid, somebody abusing a woman, killing somebody, drug dealer. I'm talking about what? First of all, bench jockeying, as Darling acknowledged, that's been part of the game for a long time. But to go back and talk about something that was alleged to have been said 33 years ago with no proof of it being said, and to the extent that it's pissed former teammates off, such as Strawberry, or Doc Gooden says he never heard it. They're black players. At least the last time I checked they were. I would think that stuff would piss them off. So that's the Lenny Dykstra bit, which I don't buy at all. But then there's Gary Carter. Gary Carter, the kid. All right? Now, Gary Carter, first of all, if you remember, there was a commercial a couple years ago. What was, I don't know if it was Stand Up to Cancer or something, was Stand Up to Cancer. Crash is looking at me, and he would hold up a sign, "My Catcher," meaning Gary Carter, because unfortunately Gary Carter has left us, passing away from cancer. But he talks about Gary Carter in the book, and he talks about Gary Carter that he's coming one day and he sees his kid sitting on his car, and the kids are like filling out ballots for the All-Star game. You know, as if to say, well, you know, that's Gary Carter. Dad's paying us for every All-Star ballot we punch out by his name, one of the kids said. And that was Gary Carter for you, according to Darling. That was Gary Carter for us. Kid would do whatever it took to win. He wouldn't break the rules, but he would work them to his advantage. Really, he was one of the smartest teammates I ever played with, one of the shrewdest catchers I ever pitched to. And here he was, gaming the system, unabashedly putting his kids to work to ensure that he received his due. And it's not like he didn't deserve to be named the National League All-Star team starting catcher. He'd been the best catcher in the game for a decade, but Kid wasn't the type to leave anything to chance. This is your friend, your catcher. What's the purpose of that? Explain to me the purpose of that. The guy is dead. Your teammate is dead. To me, that's worse than what you're saying about Lenny Dykstra. The guy is dead. Yeah, Gary Carter was one of the most accessible guys you could imagine. Always friendly. Unlike a lot of guys that I know that would, pick their spots. They would speak to only the right person or the wrong person or not the person. You follow what I'm saying? Explain to me. Somebody explain to me the purpose of what Ron Darling needed to express this about Gary Carter, his teammate. And then he also, he happened to bring out something that, this I got a kick out of. He was talking about him being a Montreal Expo. Okay? Let me get to this point. He goes, it's one thing to crave the spotlight when you're playing in the frozen tundra of the Great White North, where the fans were still kind of feeling their way around the game's traditions and nuances, and where your teammates might dismiss you as a showboat or a camera hog. Okay? He supposedly went out and learned French so he could give himself an edge in grabbing commercials and endorsement deals. Très bien, kid. Well, let me tell you something. See, I went to college in Montreal. Mr. Smarty Pants, Ron Darling, I went to college in Montreal. In Montreal happens to be a bilingual community. French-English. In fact, I might have never left Montreal when I got out of college had I spoken French fluently. I thought it would be a problem for me. So as a guy who was a star athlete in Montreal, it made perfect sense for Gary Carter to want to go ahead and learn to speak French for a variety of reasons. Sure, if it helped him get endorsements, why the hell not? It also would help him communicate with the French media, which is very big in Montreal. And you know, I'm going to tell you something else, folks. To this day, one of the regrets that I have is that I never learned Spanish. I'm dead serious about that. I remember when I started my career up in Toronto, and Toronto was one of the first teams to have an abundance of Dominican ball players. It was George Bell, Damaso Garcia, Tony Fernandez, Manny Lee. I'm just throwing out some names. And I remember being up there, and I actually was thinking of doing it, and then I ended up coming here to New York, and I still wish I had done it, because I just felt it would have helped me communicate. So to me, Gary Carter learning French was a smart thing. Okay? But you're talking about Gary Carter, your catcher, and explain to me. Somebody please explain to me what the purpose of this was, other than to embarrass the name of Gary Carter. He's dead. Okay? And, people say, well, did he need the money to write this book? I don't give a shit if you needed the money or not. It's flat out wrong. It's flat out wrong. It's disgraceful. So you have the Gary Carter incident situation, and you have the Lenny Dykstra situation. You're going to tell me, you go tell people that you got in text from teammates. Well, who's backing you up? I know guys who aren't backing you up are coming forward. But the worst of it all was what he had to say, Ron Darling did, about the beloved radio voice of the Mets, Murph. Beloved Murph, Bob Murphy. He talks about in the book, prior to, the big series in Houston, playoff series in Houston, they come in, and there is Murph, passed out drunk on a trainer's table in the middle of the room. Or trainer's table, whatever table it was, drunk in the middle of the room, and they're having a meeting, and he's talking about this. Now, as I said before, there's another guy who's dead. Just like Murph's dear friend Ralph Kiner is also dead. I would have paid money for him to write something like this, even if Murph was gone, but Kiner was still alive. And for him to look Kiner in the face and disparage his friend like that. Disgraceful. Yeah, I would really like to have known somebody coming out with a story about, Ron Darling and his friends, his cronies, and their escapades. About having maybe one too many. I would be persona non grata in that locker room had I reported something like that. And you know what? Well, I should be. Nobody gives a shit about that. Really? Nobody cares. But there was something interesting that really caught my attention on it. Because as I was reading it, and I went over it again this weekend, they were talking, what the hell is wrong with Murph? And Davey Johnson, who was the skipper who'd been running the meeting, took it on himself to answer. He said, the doctors are on their way. We think Murph had a stroke. Darling goes on to say, he said this without missing a beat, as if the fact that the team's longtime radio announcer was passed out in the middle of the room had been discussed and carefully considered by the powers to be. Of course, we've been around long enough to know that a stroke was a euphemism for being blackout drunk, and that there were no doctors en route, so we let the comment sink in. Interesting, though, because having read in this past Sunday's Daily News, Bob Raisman, longtime media sports critic, long time, longer than I'm here, and that's 30 years. He was talking about Darling and the book, but he talked about this Murphy incident. And I'm going to read a little bit from just what he wrote. According to a 1986 Hartford Courant notes column following Game 2 of the 86 NLCS by Claire Smith and Owen Canfield, Murphy was admitted to Methodist Hospital in Houston before Game 2 for observation after suffering a slight cerebral spasm. He was resting comfortably and is expected to be hospitalized for a couple of days. Ralph Kiner worked in Murphy's place on the radio broadcast of the game over WHN. You think that might have had something to do? First of all, I don't give a shit if that had anything to do with it or not. But the fact that we're disparaging Murph, laying spread out, drunk, passed out. Now, if Darling didn't know about this, okay, he didn't know about it. But, geez, you would think somebody would know about it if he would have such detail. Hospitalized, resting comfortably. Ralph Kiner took over. What am I missing here? What am I missing here? This, to me, was flat out disgraceful. I do not understand. The more I read about it, the more it pisses me off. I remember, when Murph passed away, when Bob Murph passed away, the Mets, they had a memorial service at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And it was either before, maybe it was afterwards. Maybe it was after. Right in the cathedral. I remember, we were interviewing some of the guys. One of the guys was Ron Darling's, one of his partners on the SNY broadcast, Keith Hernandez. Like yesterday, I remember Keith saying, yeah, Murph was one of us. We used to drink together. So here's a guy who used to drink together with the guys. He's dead now, and you're disparaging him. Explain that to me. Explain that to me. Because I will never, ever understand this. And, folks, the reason it pisses me off so much because covering sports for so long and being in various clubhouses and locker rooms and dugouts, field of play, there are just certain things you don't talk about. It's not necessary. It's not pertinent to anything. Now, if Murph came on the air, shit-faced hammered, or a player walked up to the bat, or standing at the line of scrimmage, shit-faced drunk, well, yeah, that's a different story. Come on. As I said, I think it's absolutely disgraceful what Ron Darling did, and I said, he's not a darling. You talk stuff like that, makes you a rat. Not good. Not good at all.